How many more mornings would begin like this? The question hung unspoken in the damp, salt-laced air of Kang Min-jun's small house. Outside, the grey sky of late autumn pressed down on the restless sea, its murmur a constant, low thrum against the stone walls of the Jeju fishing village. Min-jun, 73 years old and 5 years retired from a life spent wrestling nets and tides, stood by the window. His hands, thick and calloused, rested on the sill, the skin like weathered rope. He watched the waves claw at the black volcanic rocks below, the same view he'd had since childhood, yet now it felt different. Larger, emptier. His routine was etched deep as the lines on his face. Wake before dawn, check the sea, brew barley tea, its earthy scent the only warmth in the quiet kitchen. Simple meals eaten alone, the rhythmic clink of chopsticks against the bowl echoing in the silence. Tidying fishing gear he hadn't used in years, the phantom feel of the nets a familiar ache in his shoulders. Short, purposeful walks around the harbour, head down, acknowledging greetings with a curt nod, avoiding the knots of chatting elders whose laughter felt like a foreign language. Loneliness wasn't a visitor. It was a resident. It had moved in quietly after the sea finally forced him ashore, with a heart that sputtered like an old engine. He hadn't married. A fierce, youthful heartbreak, sharp and sudden like a squall, had convinced him early on that the sea was a more reliable, if demanding, companion. His sister had fled to the mainland decades ago, their connection frayed thin by distance and diverging lives. Now solitude was his only partner, a demanding one that offered no comfort. He saw Park Sang-chul shuffling down the village path, another fisherman put out to pasture. Sang-chul, 74, his face a road map of sun and sea, waved a hand cluttered with liver spots. "Ya, Kang Min-jun! Still counting waves?" Min-jun grunted, a sound that served as greeting. "Heard they're doing knot tying at the Malhagwan," Sang-chul continued, spitting expertly onto the dirt path. "Something for idle hands like ours. Better than staring at the water like it owes you money." Min-jun just turned back to the window. The community centre, filled with chatter, gossip, the smell of instant coffee and old women's perfume. Not his place. His place was here, with the silence and the sea sound. But the silence today felt heavier. The rhythmic crash of waves wasn't soothing. It was monotonous, counting out the slow passage of empty hours. A physical twinge in his chest, a reminder of the doctor's gentle chiding about staying active, coincided with Sang-chul's retreating figure, idle hands. Maybe the old gossip was right. What else was there? Just this, waiting. The thought chafed, unfamiliar and unwelcome. On a sudden, contrary impulse, fueled by a wariness that went deeper than bone, Min-jun pulled on his worn jacket. He wouldn't stay long. Just see. Anything was better than the echo of his own breathing in the empty house. The Malhagwan buzzed with a low energy, a mix of gossip and the focused quiet of concentration. Several elderly women sat around a low table, their fingers, gnarled yet nimble, working thick cords into traditional Jeju knots. Madep. The air smelled faintly of mugwort tea and tangerines. Min-jun hesitated at the door, feeling large and clumsy, an anchor dragged onto dry land. Then he saw her. Go Eun-hye. 71, a retired Henyo. He knew her, of course. Everyone knew everyone in this village clinging to the coast. Her husband, lost to the sea years ago. Her quiet resilience, a quality shared by all the women who'd spent their lives plunging into the cold depths. She sat slightly apart, her posture upright, her hands moving with fluid precision over the ropes. There was a stillness about her, a calm dignity that seemed untouched by the surrounding chatter. He recognized her instantly, though they'd exchanged perhaps only a dozen words in 50 years, perfunctory greetings, comments on the catch. He felt a ridiculous urge to turn and leave, his brief surge of resolve draining away. He wasn't made for this, for sitting indoors, making useless knots. But he'd come this far. Awkwardly, he found an empty cushion near the edge of the group, nodding stiffly to the room at large. He picked up a length of cord, his thick fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar task. He watched Eun-hye from the corner of his eye. Her face, framed by silvering hair pulled back neatly, was serene, her eyes focused on her work. She didn't acknowledge him directly, but he felt her awareness, a subtle shift in the air. He concentrated fiercely on the rope, his knuckles white, managing only a clumsy tangle. Someone chuckled. He felt his ears burn. This was pointless, utterly pointless. He endured an hour, the silence stretching awkwardly around him while others chatted. When the session ended, he practically bolted for the door, gulping in the sharp, clean air outside as if surfacing from a deep dive. He wouldn't be back. But the image of Go Yun-hai's calm hands, the quiet strength in her profile, stayed with him. It was a different kind of strength than the brute force of men hauling nets. It was the endurance of the tide, the resilience of the coastal pines bent by the wind. A few days later, driven by a restlessness he couldn't name, he found himself walking towards the community centre again. He told himself it was just for the walk. He arrived as the knot-tying session was ending. Yun-hai was packing her things. Their eyes met briefly. "The wind is changing," he mumbled, looking out towards the harbour. It was the language he knew. She paused, following his gaze. "Yes, it will bring rain tonight." A simple agreement, yet it felt like a conversation. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod before leaving. He started timing his walks differently. He knew Yun-hai tended a small patch of hardy vegetables near the old stone walls overlooking a minor cove, a place sheltered from the worst winds. He'd find himself drifting that way, pretending to inspect the stonework or watch the gulls. Once he saw a loose stone in her wall, threatening to tumble. Without a word, he hefted it back into place, jamming smaller pebbles to secure it. She looked up from weeding, surprised. She didn't offer effusive thanks, just a quiet, "Go mapsumnida." It was enough. Another time, as he passed, she straightened up and held out a small bundle of freshly gathered seaweed, dark green and glistening. "Good for soup," she said simply. He took it, his calloused fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second, a spark of unexpected warmth. Sang-chul wasn't blind. "Spending a lot of time admiring the rocks near Go-eun-hai's garden these days, eh?" he remarked one afternoon, his eyes shrewd. "Careful, old man. Tongues are starting to wag." Minjun bristled. "Just walking." "Walking with a purpose, seems like," Sang-chul chuckled, though there was an edge to it. "People notice things. An old bachelor, a widow, they start inventing stories." The words were like pebbles kicked deliberately into a calm pool. Minjun felt the familiar urge to withdraw, to retreat back into his fortress of solitude where no one could comment or judge. He avoided the coastal path near her garden for several days, his walks confined to the familiar, empty stretch of harbour front. He felt a dull ache of disappointment, immediately followed by irritation at his own foolishness. What did it matter? He was too old for this. Then the winter storm hit. Not a typhoon, but a fierce driving gale that screamed in off the sea, rattling shutters and sending waves crashing high against the harbour wall. It was the kind of storm that stirred old instincts in anyone who'd lived by the water. Minjun found himself pulling on his heavy coat and heading out, needing to see the boats, the state of the moorings. He wasn't surprised to see Yun-hai already there, a small, sturdy figure wrapped in layers, her face turned towards the churning water. The wind tore at them, whipping spray into their faces. They stood side by side for a long time, the roar of the storm filling the space between them. "The sea," Minjun shouted over the wind, tasting salt. "It never lets you forget who's master." She nodded, her eyes fixed on a boat straining at its ropes. "It takes, but it also gives." He thought of the friends the sea had taken, the fear that gripped you in a sudden squall, the crushing weight of water. He thought of her husband. Unexpectedly, he heard himself say, his voice raspy against the wind, "Lost a good friend out there. Young man, left a wife and 2 small children." He hadn't spoken of it in decades. Yun-hai turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. There was no pity in her eyes, just a deep, quiet understanding. "The sea holds many sorrows," she said softly, "but we endure." In that shared moment, buffeted by the wind and spray, facing the raw power that had shaped both their lives, a significant barrier crumbled. It wasn't about knots or gardens anymore. It was about survival, about loss, about the shared language of the coast. When the storm finally began to abate, they walked back towards the village in silence, the shared experience hanging between them, unspoken but profound. After the storm, things shifted subtly. Their meetings felt less accidental, more intentional, though still conducted with a quiet discretion that respected the village's watchful eyes. He'd bring her a particularly good piece of dried fish he'd prepared. She'd save him some jok, the rich abalone porridge that was a Jeju delicacy when she made it. They took walks along deserted stretches of black sand beach in the pale winter sunlight, the conversation often sparse, punctuated by long, comfortable silences filled only by the waves and the cry of gulls. He learned about her children, grown and living on the mainland. About her grandchildren she saw only occasionally. She learned about his solitary routines, his unspoken estrangement from his sister. They spoke of the changes in the village, the decline of traditional fishing, the influx of tourists in summer. They rarely spoke of feelings directly, but affection grew in the shared glances, the small kindnesses, the simple comfort of companionship against the backdrop of winter's chill. The village noticed. The whispers grew louder, less subtle. Minjun would catch snippets as he passed the fish market, acting like teenagers, at their age, should know better. Wonder what her children think. Sangchul became more direct. Minjun, people are talking seriously now, saying you're making a fool of yourself, saying she's after your house, maybe. Minjun's temper flared. That's nonsense. She's a good woman. Maybe, Sangchul conceded, scratching his neck. But appearances matter here. A widow needs to be careful. And you? Well, you've always kept to yourself. This change, it makes people suspicious. The injustice of it gnawed at Minjun. He felt a fierce protectiveness towards Yunhye, mixed with his own deep-seated fear of ridicule. He saw the way some of the other village women looked at Yunhye now, a little cooler, a little more appraising. He knew it bothered her, though she never complained, her quiet dignity her shield. His internal conflict intensified. Part of him wanted to retreat, to shield them both from the gossip by ending these tentative steps towards connection. But another part, a part reawakened by Yunhye's quiet warmth, rebelled. Why should their quiet companionship be subject to such petty scrutiny? Why should finding a measure of solace in their later years be considered shameful? He was caught between his lifelong habit of solitude and the unexpected pull towards another person, between fear of judgment and a stubborn refusal to be dictated to. The Jeju winter deepened, mirroring the chill of the village whispers, while the small flame of connection between him and Yunhye flickered, vulnerable but persistent. The midwinter solstice arrived, a time traditionally marked in the village with prayers for safety and prosperity in the coming year. A modest gathering was planned at the Mole Heguan, involving shared food, perhaps some folk songs, and a simple offering led by the village elder. It was an event most residents attended, a reaffirmation of community bonds, however frayed they might be by daily gossip. Minjun hesitated about going. These communal events always amplified his sense of being an outsider, but not going felt like hiding, like validating the whispers. More importantly, he knew Yunhye would be there. He found himself wanting to be in the same room, even amidst the scrutiny. He put on a cleaner sweater and headed out into the biting wind. The community centre was crowded, warm with body heat and the smell of steamed rice cakes. He saw Eunhye near the back, chatting quietly with another former Henyo. He made his way over, drawn by an invisible current. They exchanged nods, a small smile touching Eunhye's lips. He stood beside her, not speaking much, just observing the room. He was acutely aware of the glances flicking their way, the sudden silences as they passed certain groups. The air felt thick with unspoken commentary. Sangchul ambled over, a bowl of makgeolli in his hand. "Enjoying the festivities, you two?" he asked, his tone louder than necessary, drawing attention. Before they could answer, Mrs. O, a woman known for her sharp tongue and encyclopedic knowledge of village affairs, chimed in from a nearby table. "Indeed," she said, her voice carrying clearly, "it's good to see folks keeping active, though some might say, well, some activities are more fitting for certain ages than others. Best not to give the young people reason to talk, eh?" The remark landed like a stone dropped into the room. A ripple of silence spread outwards. All eyes, it seemed to Minjun, were suddenly on them. He felt a hot flush creep up his neck, the old instinct to shrink back, to disappear into the shadows, surging powerfully. He could feel the weight of expectation, the judgment, the assumption of impropriety. He saw Yunhye's hand tighten almost imperceptibly on her small cloth bag, the only sign of her reaction. Her face remained composed, but he saw the slight tightening around her eyes, a flicker of hurt she tried to conceal. He looked at Mrs. O's smug expression, at Sangchul's awkward neutrality, at the curious or disapproving faces around them. Fear warred with anger, shame with a stubborn spark of defiance. Retreat now, and the whispers would win. Retreat now, and he would betray not only Yuni's quiet dignity, but also this fragile, unexpected warmth that had begun to thaw his frozen core. His heart pounded against his ribs like a trapped bird. He wasn't a man of eloquent speeches or grand gestures. His language was the sea, the weather, the mend of a net. But inaction felt like drowning. Taking a slow breath, feeling the collective gaze of the room upon him, Minjun made his choice. He didn't turn to Mrs. O. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he took one deliberate step closer to Go Yunhye. He looked down at her, then gently, firmly, offered her his arm. It was a simple gesture, archaic perhaps, but unmistakable in its intent. An alignment, a public declaration without words. Yunhye looked up at him, surprise softening her features for a moment, followed by a dawning understanding. After a heartbeat's hesitation, she placed her hand lightly on his forearm. The silence in the room stretched, thick and charged. Mrs. O's mouth snapped shut. Sang-chul shifted his weight, looking down into his makgeolli bowl. Then, slowly, awkwardly, conversations resumed, but the undercurrent had shifted. The direct challenge had been met, not with anger, but with quiet solidarity. Minjun kept his arm steady, feeling the light pressure of Yunhye's hand, a small point of warmth against the lingering chill of the room. He had crossed a threshold, not just in the eyes of the village, but within himself. In the immediate aftermath of the solstice gathering, an awkward quiet settled over the village concerning Minjun and Yunhye. People still looked, of course. Curiosity didn't evaporate overnight, but the pointed comments seemed to recede, replaced by whispers behind cupped hands. Minjun and Yunhye walked home from the Malhaiguan that evening, not side-by-side touching, but closer than usual, the unspoken event, a shared weight and a shared victory between them. A new level of understanding had been reached without needing words. In the days and weeks that followed, they didn't flaunt their connection, but they no longer sought the shadows. Their walks along the coast became a regular occurrence, less hidden, less hesitant. If they met in the market, they stopped to talk openly. The fear of judgment hadn't vanished entirely for Minjun, but it had loosened its grip, overshadowed by the quiet comfort he found in Yunhye's presence. Her calm acceptance of him, flaws and gruffness included, was a balm he hadn't known he needed. As winter began its slow retreat, they found a shared project. Yunhye had inherited a small, neglected tangerine grove slightly inland from her seaside garden plot. The trees were overgrown, the ground choked with weeds. Together they began the slow work of reclamation. Minjun, surprisingly adept with pruning shears, tackled the tangled branches while Yunhye cleared the undergrowth, her movements economical and strong. They worked companionably, sometimes talking, often in comfortable silence, the shared physical labor forging a different kind of bond. It was practical, tangible, a partnership rooted in the Jeju soil. Neighbors passing on the narrow road would see them there, two figures working steadily under the pale winter sun, and perhaps began to see them less as a scandalous item of gossip and more as simply a pair. Sang-chul eventually sought Minjun out one crisp afternoon down at the harbour where Minjun was needlessly inspecting the hull of his long-retired boat. The old fisherman cleared his throat, looking out at the water. "Heard you're playing farmer now," he grumbled. Minjun merely grunted. Sang-chul kicked at a loose stone. "That Mrs. O still got a tongue like a rusty knife, but fewer people are listening, maybe." He paused, then added grudgingly, "Go and hear. She always worked hard. Knows her way around." He pulled a small flask from his pocket. "Have some?" Minjun hesitated, then accepted the flask of potent soju. They shared a drink in silence, the awkwardness thick but somehow companionable. It was Sang-chul's way of acknowledging the shift, a grudging acceptance that felt more meaningful than any apology. The harsh lines of winter softened into the tentative green of early spring. The biting wind gentled, carrying the scent of damp earth and the promise of blossoms. The sea, too, seemed calmer, its surface glittering under a brighter sun. One mild afternoon, Minjun and Yunhye walked their familiar path along the coast. The black rocks were dotted with patches of resilient spring grass, impossibly green against the dark volcanic stone. Yunhye pointed towards the water. "The fish are returning," she said, a note of quiet satisfaction in her voice. Minjun nodded, scanning the horizon. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. It wasn't the boisterous happiness of youth, nor the hard-won satisfaction of a good catch. It was something quieter, deeper, a sense of belonging, not necessarily to the village, but to this moment, to this shared quietude beside another person who understood the rhythms of the sea and